and physical protests and campaigns to virtual forms. They were the first to call for ensuring mental health and well-being of workers and communities under this period of isolation and social distancing. Yeah, CSOs have been helping ADB and its member countries to achieve development goals in many ways. CSO involvement helped us to ensure effective, timely, and transparent implementation of projects. This is becoming especially critical for implementation of projects during the pandemic crisis, where ADB staff had limited or no access to many project site areas. Also, CSOs helped us to target community needs and ensure that these are addressed in project outcomes. These include the needs of the most vulnerable people, such as women being head of households, children, persons with disabilities, poor, and others. CSOs have been helping us to establish continuous communication with local communities and making sure that our consultations are meaningful. And also CSOs are helping in implementation of ADB finance projects outputs. And among all CWRD countries, first of all, I'd like to highlight about our special achievements on CSO engagement in Afghanistan. Our colleague from resident mission in Afghanistan will be providing a more detailed presentation on this, but I'd like to highlight some of the achievements that were made in Afghanistan. This has been an easy task to prepare and implement projects in fragile and conflict-affected situation environment. And it is the most rewarding to observe that our projects provide significant positive impacts in addressing many Afghanistan's development needs. Among positive impacts, ADB-funded projects created thousands of job opportunities, and hundreds of cases of engagement of CSOs in Afghanistan. These are mostly irrigation projects in agriculture and natural resource and rural development sector. Many community development councils were engaged as contractors to conduct rehabilitation works on irrigation channels. I'd like to list some of the achievements, some of these being implemented, some are still planning, and these are mostly from the procurement plans that have been included. First, Argandap Integrated Water Resource Development Project. There have been $35 million allocated, and we expect 320 contracts with community development councils. Then, Horticulture Value Chain Development Sector Project. It has allocated 6.2 million for 62 community development council contracts. Also, there will be NGO engaged to assist farmers to gain access to project benefits through the identification of potential farmers beneficiaries, the preparation of sub-project documents required for participation in the project, the coordination of implementation of on-farm sub-projects, and the coordination of post-installation training in the use of the maintenance of on-farm improvements. Panjshir River Basin Sector Project, additional financing. It has $2.9 million for 42 community development contracts. Water Resource Development Investment Program. It has 1.5 million with at least 15 community development contracts. It has also, this project have also engaged a local NGO named Bureau for Rights-Based Development, which was engaged for capacity building support on participatory irrigation management to irrigation associations and water user associations in Balkh and Nangarhar provinces. Also, we have a Water Resource Development Investment Program, Project 2, which has allocated 5.7 million for at least 50 community development council contracts. This project also engaged a local NGO that provide, resource management consultant services, and they supported capacity development of Ministry of Agriculture, Irrigation and Livestock. Also, besides, this significant achievements in Afghanistan, we also have good, achievements in Tajikistan. There has been, and our focal for Tajikistan resident mission, Tatiana Evtiseva, she'll deliver representation in more details, but I'll just highlight that there was, tourism development project where they engaged two national NGOs that conducted certain, capacity building activities together with the United Nations World Tourism Organization. Also, we have CSO engagement in Uzbekistan, Karek Corridor Karakalpakstan project, where Businesswomen Association has been engaged, and a livestock value chain development project also engaged NGO Horizon Rural Advisory Support Services. And, we've been cooperating with SDCC on implementation of technical assistance on deepening civil society engagement for development effective deepening civil society engagement in ADB operations, Project 3. This TA piloted engagement of civil society organizations in Armenia, Georgia, and Afghanistan. And actually, this training is part of that cooperation and engagement. And, there were other CSO engagement in CWRD countries. First 2 days of these, sessions will include country-specific presentations and discussions on CSO engagement experience for Afghanistan, Armenia, Georgia, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan. They will, provide, speakers will provide more details on outputs and achievements made through engaging CSOs. And then the third day training will be dedicated to the proposed new amendments on operational manual and staff instructions on business processes for promotion of engagement with civil society organizations. There are new amendments that, major amendments that will introduce and describe, what is the definition of civil society organizations, new approaches and depths of participation of CSOs, business processes on CSO engagement, proactive actions that can be taken in engaging CSOs in policy development and review and preparing country partnership strategies. Also, it describes, ways how, civil society organizations can be engaged in the project cycle, and whatever other areas where, CSOs can be engaged. And a third day training will also summarize proposed changes to part 2 of the summary poverty reduction and social strategy, and part 3 of the initial poverty and social analysis. And this will be pretty much part of our operations in the next year. And therefore, I really encourage our participants on this training to ask as many questions as possible, as these are new amendments, and we need really to understand and make sure that, whatever our internal targets and, deliverables that we have planned earlier comply with these new requirements and strategies. Yes, and with these notes, I'd like to pass to, open the floor to Georgi Kladeshvili. Thank you so much for joining us today. Georgi is from Institute for Development of Freedom of Information in Georgia. And after Georgi, we'll have Luzin Simonyan from Armenia Child Development Foundation. And thank you so much, Georgi and Luzin, for joining us today on these sessions. As you know, Georgia and Armenia were chosen for, having, I think, great experience at the countries with a lot of local NGOs, very active NGOs that have been making a huge impact on Armenia's and Georgia's, I think, political arena, human rights and freedoms. And I really welcome and look forward to hear from you. Georgi, floor is yours. I hope I correctly spelled out your first name and last name.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Aida, for this opportunity. And I would like also to thank the NGO and Civil Society Center of the ADB for this opportunity and for making this, for organizing this interesting training. I hope that I will be delivering that information that will be useful for the team, and I will be generally focused on the development in Georgia and giving the examples from the Georgian perspective. And I'll just give a brief information about myself. I'm Georgi Gliashvili, Executive Director of the Institute for Development of Freedom of Information. This is the NGO based in Georgia, but we have projects and we are operating globally on the various of topics. Mainly it is about the good governance and democracy, but we also cover lots of policy areas, including economy, social sector, media, fighting corruption, etc. So we are the multiple directional think tank and a hybrid organization working both on monitoring government actions and activities, as well as providing different types of consultancy and assistance to the various government institutions. And we were quite actively involved during the pandemic, and I really regret that we have this training from distance. And I would be, I've participated in many of ADB's organized meetings, and I really wish that the next time of our interaction will be face to face. So once again, thank you for this opportunity, and I'll be now go to my presentation, which is focused about the developments during the pandemic situation in Georgia. What are the prospects for the ADB's involvement, and what can be done in this regard? What are the challenges and what are the opportunities to work and more closely cooperate with civil society from the ADB's perspective? Approach of ADB toward the civil society organizations, which is the major direction. It is the recognition of importance of engagement more effectively with civil society, and the ADB funded project beneficiaries to ensure that Asia Development Bank's funded projects achieve their goals and development services are inclusive and contribute to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Agenda and its goals. Forms of cooperation, these are the technical assistance and policy development. Incorporating civil society organizations' experience and knowledge. This is really important because civil society organizations have quite strong expertise, which is generally needed for during this process. And the good practices and information which is gathered and collected is shared, and consultation cases are quite as many in Georgia. So this can be quite well used by the ADB. Need for fast adaptability to the changing environments and local contexts. This is really important to be considered. Next slide, please. Challenges amplified by the pandemic in Georgia. As I've mentioned, I'll be generally focused on the Georgia environment and what happened starting from the global pandemic. And well, the major challenge was that country had lockdowns, and we had to switch to the distant operation mode. Therefore, services, and especially e-governance and digital services, were very much needed, and Georgia was not that much prepared for this, and we had the lack of digital services, especially from the government side, the government services. Also, all government institutions, different private sector institutions, NGOs also had to switch to the digital services mode and the distance learning, distance operating mode. Therefore, we had quite limited services on the digital side. Challenges in the communication with the government institutions. Citizens are not aware of the electronic mechanism necessary for distance communication. Therefore, it affects seriously their engagement in policy making and public service delivery. I have mentioned it many times, but this was quite a challenging moment, not only in Georgia, but globally. Lack of digital skills among public servants, especially in the regions. Low level of transparency in public expenditure, especially in public procurement. Delays in providing freedom of information requests, challenges to access contracts of particular public tenders. It was really challenging because during the lockdowns, access to information was restricted, and those interested in providing monitoring of government spendings, we are not able to request information from government institutions. Obscuring the human rights to public safety purposes. This was also a challenging because we needed to keep the balance between the existing situation and existing needs for lockdowns, etc., and restrictions, and those of the human rights that we are affected by this. Next slide, please. What also caused was the, just generally overviewing, is the worsened social and economic conditions of people, because Georgia is much dependent on tourism as a country, and due to the close of borders, Georgia had serious lack of income from the tourist sector. Therefore, a lot of harm was felt by the society from the on this due to this fact. Worsened social economic conditions for vulnerable groups. Challenges in the healthcare system, because there was a big burden on the healthcare system due to the pandemic, and much focus and of course resources were directed to the healthcare system. How healthcare system was prepared for such a pandemic, it is also a big question mark. Increased violations of women's rights, increased domestic violence, because of the lockdowns, people were staying at homes, and there were many increased cases of domestic violence as well. Worsened level of public participation and participation of various groups, including youth participation. Challenges in education system, because people, as I've mentioned already, were switched to the distance learning mode, and it also affected because due to the penetration of internet, especially in the rural areas, as well as the lack of the number of devices with for the families. Slow progress in implementation of action plans and government strategies programs, including sustainable development goals, which is the mandate of the government of Georgia. Next slide, please. Well, the challenges that we are created by pandemic in the public procurement area, which is the most and which has the highest interest from those of the organizations which are providing the monitoring of government spendings. You know that the donor organizations have announced readiness to assist Georgia and provide a big number of support, including 1.1 billion US dollars, which is 3 billion Georgian lari and a little bit more, to assist the economic recovery of country. Out of this amount, actually, the ADB's contribution is 200 million. It was a policy loan to support Georgia's economic recovery factors of crucial importance. And it has to be also mentioned that ADB is the biggest donor financial institution for Georgia. And monitoring of COVID-19 related public spendings, monitoring medical public procurement, electronic procurement platform. These are the areas which had a high focus from the society. Supporting OCDS, which is the Open Contracting Data Standards for publication. This is also of high importance. Civil society organizations, including IDFI, was very much supporting the openness in the public procurement, because most of the procurement during the pandemic were provided in so-called urgent procurement system, which is not that transparent and doesn't meet the electronic transparency requirements. And due to that, there was a risk of corruption during the public procurement during the pandemic times. Can I have the next slide, please? Challenges created again in public procurement. Product specifications are not uploaded on the online system, as I have mentioned. Clear selection precepts due to the lack of competition, because, as I mentioned, as the urgent procurement does not need the electronic tender, go through the electronic tender, so there is a big risk of corruption, and also the risk that the state budget funds being concentrated with companies that are donate or are affiliated with the ruling party. IDFI has published several research about the public procurement during the pandemic times, and it showed that the biggest state funds were directed to the companies which are affiliated with the ruling party. Next slide, please. Challenges created by the pandemic on the sustainable development goals. You know that civil society organizations are much involved in this sustainable development goals implementation process in Georgia, and the pandemic seriously triggered existing challenges in regards of the SDGs implementation in the country. So what was the major challenges? Lack of political will to engage relevant stakeholders in the process of sustainable development goals implementation, low level of participation in the process of voluntary national review process and preparation, lack of awareness raising activities due to the lockdowns, and low level of SDGs integration in national policy documents. These are the major challenges that were caused due to the pandemic in Georgia, and I try to generally overview the situation that caused the pandemic in the country. But later I will be speaking about the responses that were done with the participation of civil society organizations, and what can be done in cooperation with the Asia Development Bank, and what can ADB focus in cooperation with civil society organizations. Yes, so the role of civil society organizations during pandemic. Civil society organizations have a strong expertise in the various of fields. So consulting the executive and legislative government on both civil, on central and local levels with the expertise in various areas, relevant research, reports and training on digital and e-services, e-governance, human rights, public awareness raising, monitoring the government accountability and transparency, monitoring public procurement during pandemic, monitoring human rights environment, public engagement and awareness raising activities. These are the areas that civil society can be actively engaged. Next slide, please. So not only the government or the general society was affected by pandemic, but the work of civil society was also quite affected with this global pandemic. So especially the small civil society organizations, which are not well established and well known in the country, so mainly in the rural areas. Civil society organizations with the small scale financial assistance, civil society organizations working on the provision of social services. Next slide, please. Challenges to effectively communicate it with their beneficiaries, especially for those providing social services. Challenges regarding slow adaptability to the existing environment, especially for those with low institutional development, as I have mentioned. Problems to effectively communicate their recommendations on various public policy issues to decision makers and other stakeholders. Insufficient resources and mechanisms for holding government accountable during pandemic. Financial instability and lack of diversification of donors. This was also a big challenge for civil society organizations. Next slide, please. What can be the role of the ADB to further cooperate with civil society organizations? Promoting dialogue between civil society organizations and decision makers for positive changes. As I've mentioned, civil society organizations have provided lots of recommendations during the pandemic, and it was very useful because especially to raise public awareness about and provide information to the society, creating different websites of information, etc. Opening public procurement. These were the issues that was of a high importance to inform society about the development of the situation in the country. Issuing grants and capacity development and institutional sustainability. This can be also part of the ADB's work. Issuing grants for improving technical skills of civil society organization and local community, including on the issues of digital literacy, which was of a high importance and high interest. Next slide, please. ADB can play a crucial part in the process of strengthening SDGs implementation in Georgia. ADB was involved in this process for a long time, and it is of a high importance to stay in this topic and support civil society organizations to better advocate for SDGs implementation and involve government institutions in this process, ensuring engagement of relevant stakeholders in the process of SDGs integration in Georgia, raising public awareness on SDGs, reaching out to the regions, internalizing, insisting problems in the areas of linkages between SDGs and national policy documents, and taking relevant steps to tackle the problem. Next slide, please. Public procurement, which is the most important part for the government accountability and transparency and for the risks of corruption. It is really crucial to support initiatives aimed at strengthening public procurement and its monitoring in such directions as publication of procurement information in the open contract data standards, which enables those who are involved to work on the raw data and work on the open data information, strengthening the capacities of civil society organizations, media, the wider society, particularly in the regions, to raise public awareness, capacity buildings of public officials, and this can be civil society organizations can strongly involved in this process, increasing number of bidders, small and medium scale enterprises trained on the procedures of public procurement. This can also be done with the involvement of civil society organizations. And TPPR, this is the platform Transparent Public Procurement Rating, which was the IDFI's initiative, and currently it covers globally 40 countries, including countries from the Central Asia, Asia Pacific region, and this improves the legislation and practice of about the public procurement. This can be also supported by the Asia Development Bank to further penetrate in the Asia Pacific region and support civil society organizations in monitoring and also cooperating with the counterparts from the government side, which are focused on the public procurement. Next slide, please. And policy of the Asia Development Bank for 2030. This is how we look at this topic, how further ADB can be engaged in working with the civil society. Elaborate country-specific strategies for 2030 with the engagement of civil society organizations. Extending the cooperation network to meet the goals of sustainability and inclusiveness, supporting institutional and capacity development of civil society organizations through providing opportunities to get engaged in monitoring and evaluating the ongoing projects in the country, considering the needs of local civil society organizations which are dealing with the several problems in the local community when designing particular projects in the country. Next slide, please. Expanding cooperation with civil societies with the focus on awareness raising activities for community leaders, members, and supporting projects addressing the most pressing local needs. For instance, it can be healthcare, it can be education sector, etc. Supporting the creation of the local and regional network of civil society organizations which concentrate on responsible business development and environmental protection. Next slide, please. This is actually the quite generally speaking about the environment in Georgia and how ADB can be engaged, and I will be happy to provide more detailed information during the question and answer session. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Georgie.
I'm returning.
Yes.
I'm returning floor to you.
Thank you, Georgie. Aida, back to you. Your mic is on mute.
Okay, I've turned on my mic, I think, and video. You can see me, right?
Yes, great. Thank you, Aida.
Yeah, Georgie, thank you so much for a very interesting presentation. You know, you've highlighted, you know, as maybe from many other countries, it would be very interesting. It was very interesting to see, you know, how you openly highlighted all of the challenges that you have encountered in, you know, during the pandemic crisis. And, you know, I'm very pleased and welcome to see this level of transparency. And, you know, I look forward in further that there will be, you know, closer cooperation, and, you know, NGOs will continue, you know, they are planning right now, and they will continue to play the major key role in helping the government to address this crisis related issues. And are there any questions to Georgi or maybe to me before we transfer to Lizine, or should I transfer to Lizine directly for presentation and leave the Q&A session for the last?
Yes, please. I guess we can proceed with Lucine. Her
Okay,
message also.
Luzine, welcome. Thank you so much for joining today's presentation. Luzine Simonian is from Child Development Foundation in Armenia. Yes, and please welcome to say maybe to start with a few words about yourself and about the foundation activity before going into presentation.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. I am Lucina Simonian from Child Development Foundation, almost working as a director already for 10 years. I'm very sorry because it was very short notice and I didn't manage to have a presentation. That's why I will just speak and I develop my speech from the perspective of our NGO's challenges and recommendations, not generally from Armenian CSO field. As an example of one NGO which exposure the problems and issues during the pandemic. Child Development Foundation is child-oriented foundation which works in 4 regions of Armenia and Yerevan. We have several blocks and components in our foundation, which are the service provision, such as social work and various therapeutic services through our child centers in 2 regions, in 3 centers, to children, their families, and also working in child protection sphere within stakeholders such as kindergartens, schools, polyclinics, and other institutions regarding child protection. Also, we are implementing various projects in the social, educational sphere, and mainly we are now supporting government to implement the reform of community social work institutionalization, and also working with ADB for the deepening online education and deepening civil society engagement with government on online education system, and implementing the project now. During the pandemic, we, as other countries in our country as well, we have different challenges in all levels, community level, regional level, and national level. And as far as service providing NGO, we moved to the online approach and online implementation of our services. And projects have also started working remotely. Pandemic brought new challenges such as unemployment, health, lack of child services in all levels. And as far as we were partnering with local self-government and community social work were very active in pandemic situation, we identified lots of issues regarding families and children living in life difficult circumstances, and the level of life difficult circumstances families were raised very highly in all communities. What we experienced during the pandemic as far as working in social work sphere, we understood that there are several projects and humanitarian assistance, there are different projects that are relevant for the pandemic situation are going on, but there were a lack of coordination by the government and consolidated approaches as far as there were communities that had specialists like community social workers, and we had lots of communities without specialists. Also, there were problems of data collection and duplication of the projects, and consolidated one data that government could coordinate. These are just a few challenges that we encountered during our project implementation. But mainly, what other challenges Child Development Foundation has, that we did our services offline and work remotely, but to this we have changed and responses. We have changed our approaches. What we did as an NGO, modification of the NGO strategy relevant to the crisis management, such as humanitarian fundraising, project proposal submissions, and modifying our operations approaches. Online service provision and social work with the families, online consultation, also development of social work manual for community social workers, and new working tools to do initial need assessment of the families regarding pandemic issues. With the project of ADP that we started August, the main project goal is to understand the stress of specific target group, teachers, parents, children, in online education, and to respond to that stress, to develop new tools for making more effective environment for online education. Our project has 5 main components, which is to identify the needs during the online education in our target groups, teachers, parents, and children, and to develop, based on that needs, the tools for making non-stressful situation during the online education, to develop modules for our target groups, and to have capacity building component, and to do social work with the families during the project, mainly specifically taking into consideration the online education issues for parents, family, and children. Now we are in a stage of finalizing the tools and developing the models for capacity building, and also we are continuing social work in working with families during the pandemic, but also starting from September, we had the war situation and military law situation, and we modified and complement to our project also psychosocial services to the families and people and children and their parents for psychosocial support during the post-war and war situation. Also taking into consideration and both approaches, pandemic crisis and law crisis. For the cooperation with the government and ADP, I would like to highlight the following opportunities: that there is a clear communication and understanding of government strategy and funding project that complement it. We worked very closely with government in order to understand the online education further strategy and to support to that strategy, but also we communicated very closely with the government from the practical and from our need assessment point of view in order to come to the same level, to have grassroots level understanding and practices and policy level understanding, and to complement to each other. Close communication and collaboration with government and other relevant stakeholders in all stages of the project, and negotiation based on the government strategy and project. We negotiated in all stages of the project, and we had joint working groups with relevant stakeholders, and we communicated very closely with our developed materials, need assessment criteria, so on and so forth, in order to be in the same level of understanding with government point of view and also from practical and grassroots point of view. We value the expertise and recommendation of ADB's international and local staff, because it was our first project with ADB fund, and there are professional development opportunities with working with ADB. For instance, we found CMS registration very challenging at first, but working with that now, it has contributed to general tech capability of our team and organizational development. Also, it is very important to note, as a CSO, the new opportunities of new network and new partners and new opportunities for further project developments. For the recommendation for ADB to strengthen its relations with CSOs under the context of conflict and pandemic in the region, I would like to tell that given the dynamic changes under the context of pandemic and conflict, it's hard to highlight specific things now. One thing we can suggest to be open to listen and to and consider the grassroots experience of organizations and integrate them into projects. Also, I think ADB could use its network of experts to help CSOs working under context of conflict and pandemic. And how do CSOs in your country relate with government? To answer this question, there are different mechanisms from public hearings to online platforms, but none of these are developed enough. And as far as we had the situation before revolution, and now war and post-war situation, there are different NGOs who are proactive, and they might get a seat at the table and work with the government. But after the revolution, our government has started to develop more approaches and mechanisms to engage more CSO development and cooperation with government. But now we have different situation and everyday changing situation in Armenia, and that's why it's very hard to give some specific recommendation. But generally speaking, I would suggest that ADB can promote more involvement of CSOs with government cooperation, such as strategy and mechanism development that government can take into consideration the grassroots level expertise of NGOs, such as statistics, practical requirements, and to cooperate with them, to negotiate with them, to put it in government strategy. Also, to take the expertise and project implementation activities of CSOs to build the more consolidated approach of working with and working in NGO level. Also, I spoke about everyday changing situation. That's why it's very hard to give more specific recommendations, but also I would like to note that ADB can take into consideration that there are several initiatives and projects that are going on. For example, Open Parliament Government, which is also one of the initiatives that CDF is involved, that promoting the government and CSO communication. You can just take more information and to consider to complement to that initiative in order not to have duplications and new initiative. I think this is all what I can share with you during this very short time that I developed. And sorry for not having presentations. Thank you.
Luzine, thank you so much for your presentation, and thank you so much for taking on a short notice. We had another presenter planned to join us from Ministry of Education of Armenia today, but instead we have Child Development Foundation representative Luzine, and you've done a great job. Thank you for openly discussing the challenges. I've noticed you've also mentioned about your experience, not only with in-country experience, but also with your experience on with ADB on platforms like CMS and the challenges that you had there. Yeah, and I look forward, I think, in the next maybe 2 sessions, and I think you have the contacts, our contacts, and the contacts from the resident mission as well. Please feel free to contact us whenever you have any technical issues with CMS. We really encourage NGOs to be part of our projects, and it would be very unfortunate that because of some technical issues you wouldn't be able to take the opportunities. And yes, I confirm that the procurement process in ADB is not an easy one, and we have quite strict requirements, but these are policy requirements. Lainie and her team have done a lot of efforts to make this slightly easier within the given policies, but this is what we have, unfortunately. Yes, and we do struggle. And I think main reason for this probably is that most of ADB funded projects are aimed into large funds, and there are some waves are given to a smaller fund contracts, but not much difference, I assume.
Thank you. Also, just mentioned that we have already no problems with CMS, and it was a great opportunity for our NGO staff to be engaged in this project. And now we are learning a lot also, and it's also very good for organizational development as an CSO.
Okay. Yeah, and any questions maybe, Georgi, Luzine, you may to Georgi and Luzine, or to me, someone in the audience may have. If no questions, we can. I can transfer it to Lainie or Roselle to describe about activities on the next 2 days.
Mm-hmm. Ida, thank you, and thank you to Georgie and to Lucine. We actually have one note in the chat box. Lady actually mentioned that the presentation from our colleagues from Armenia and Georgia are both bleak picture challenges, right? Really challenging situation in those countries, and I think not only there but in other countries in CWRD as well during the pandemic. But from these challenges, do we also see opportunities? Where can civil society we've seen, for example, some examples from Luzine on how their NGO CDF is responding, providing social protection online, social services, online mental health services to children and their families, and teachers even. So we find such kind of opportunities given this context. But do you see other areas for involvement of civil society and the work of civil society to address these challenges as well? And how can ADB support CSOs on these?
I'll take the floor first. Thank you very much for the question. Actually, absolutely right. It was a bleak picture of the environment and the situation development in Georgia, but I do not think that it was much different from the other states. Pandemic unfortunately affected the globe. It was not in the single country. It started in the in particular countries, but then it developed globally, and now it is the pandemic, which means global situation. So what I have presented in my speech and in my presentation is quite well reflects the situation, especially in the countries of the Asia Pacific and generally in the Asia region. So I think that it depends on the civil society organization, which is the activity and focus area of the organization. What is the area that this civil society organization can be involved in? It might be women's rights, it might be youth, it can be education, it can be healthcare, it can be anti-corruption direction, good governance, public service delivery, etc. So what I see as the opportunity or, well, the positive change, it's really hard to speak about positive changes which caused the pandemic, but actually, first of all, the pandemic showed that there is an increased need for the electronic governance development globally. It's a need for the distance public service delivery and much focus on the crisis areas, such what can be healthcare system, what can be education system during the crisis. So countries should be better prepared for the for such kind of small or big crisis. And the role of civil society, I have listed number of areas where civil society can be involved in. The first is the expertise, because what I have mentioned, civil society organizations have the strong expertise in the various of fields, and it can be well used during such kind of crisis. So consultancy from civil society organizations, trainings, involvement in the decision-making processes, at least on the advisory level. I'm not talking to that civil society organizations should be taking political decisions, but I'm talking about the advising and consulting governments in their decision-making processes. And also much involvement in the transparency areas, because public procurement, which is the biggest question mark during such kind of crisis, because if countries have the electronic system of public procurement, which should be transparent, in these cases, for instance, in Georgia, all public procurement during the crisis was out of the electronic tenders. And this needed much involvement of civil society monitoring. And public information should be provided. And for instance, speaking about the proactive disclosure of information, this was the recommendation that we have submitted not only to the government of Georgia, but to different governments through the Open Government Partnership Initiative. This was recommendations to all governments to focus on the openness and transparency in the area of public procurement and proactively deliver information to citizens, because information is one step forward to resolve the crisis, because people should be informed about the much information they receive, more they are involved and adequately responding to the restrictions. So this is my opinion, but we can speak a lot about this issue. So now I'll leave next rest to speak to Luzin.
Thank you. Again, to highlight, I didn't mention it in my speech, that during the pandemic and also to our war situation, we understood that we didn't have, especially in child protection system, we didn't have crisis management strategy from the government. And there were several initiatives from several NGOs that we proactively suggested to our government to develop some draft for crisis management. We developed it and now we are advocating it, but after pandemic we had another situation of war situation, and now we are working on it, but still it's not in the policy level final decision, but we are pushing and advocating that government must have crisis strategy of crisis management, and especially in child protection system. Also, from the positive perspective, for example, we were pushing the community social work reform to the government, but during the pandemic and the war, they understood very clearly that without community social work, without social work professionals, it's very hard to have a crisis management situation. And in all communities that we had the community social workers, they understood that without these people, without these professionals, it would be impossible to have the all humanitarian assistance and working with family, effective working family situation. Also from positive perspective, again, we were in crisis management, and from the management point of view, in educational level, social level, health level, both governmental and non-governmental approaches we understood, and we started thinking alternatively and started thinking to find new ways, to find new approaches, and to take also international expertise, experience, and to adapt it to our Armenian situation and our relevant situation. And it was also from individual level to organizational level to community level and national level. I think it was an opportunity to think in alternative way and to find new solutions, taking into consideration the needs and relevant and current situation. I think this is all that we identified, and this is all that I can tell you now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Georgie, Lucine. Ida, you'd like to
Yeah,
open the
thank you
floor
so
to
much. Yeah.
questions?
Yep. Any questions were there on the chat box, I wonder? Or maybe anyone on the training right now would like to say something? We have colleagues from Armenia or Georgia who can comment on this kind of open remarks about Armenian and Georgian government, and also on other governments.
Right,
from
and that
Georgia.
it's not unique experience to Armenia and Georgia, and it's
Yes.
also the challenges are all over, even in my country, the Philippines, and
Yeah.
we experience the same, some of those very issues. Anyone from our participants to ask our speakers or even share their thoughts? There's one from Masood. Okay. The question from Masood from Afghanistan is a question for both speakers. How can we encourage or facilitate CSO NGO collaboration with each other in their countries? Anyone would like to start? Georgie or Lucine?
Yes, very good question. Actually, the coalition work is really important during the crisis. And giving example of Georgia, and generally speaking about the civil society engagement, I want to give the examples from the Open Government Partnership Initiative. I had the honor and pleasure to be the steering committee member of this initiative for 3 years, and my term ended just a couple months ago. OGP mobilized the ideas to respond to the crisis from the globe, from civil society organizations, from governments. Actually, this is the joint initiative of governments and civil society organizations, and the major focus of this initiative was to respond to the crisis as soon as it started. So it generated different initiative, different ideas, different recommendations from the globe to share it among the colleagues from civil society and governments, and to have the good practices from collected and then shared among the member states. What was done in Georgia, actually, we have several strong coalition of civil society organizations working in the different policy areas. For instance, judiciary, corruption, media advocacy, etc. So these are the open government partnership also is working on the central level, legislative level, and the local level. So these are the coalition of NGOs that that consult, that monitor, and also provide recommendations to governments how to respond to the crisis in different areas. So I think that the coalition work is really important to achieve the goals. The joint advocacy in the central policy areas is really important to achieve changes. So I encourage civil society organizations to jointly advocate on the policy areas related to this crisis, and I think it affected all sectors, executive, legislative, and judiciary. So this is my opinion about it.
Thank you, Georgie. Lucine, you want to add to that?
To the CSO cooperation in Armenia, we also have very strong cooperation. Especially, I would like to speak about child protection CSOs, because we also have child protection network, which includes more than 40 CSOs from all over the Armenia, and mainly we have projects in advocacy level for advocating protection issues with this network. But during the pandemic also it was good cooperation between social and child protection NGOs. But again, we have some issues of duplicating some locations, duplicating the same project. But we had an initiative and we developed data that was monitoring every week and updating the projects implemented by different NGOs in order not to duplicate and to understand and to have the information what is going on in different regions, what is going on with different organizations. There is a very good initiative from donors' perspective that I would like to share. For example, EU funded project, USAID funded project, or different embassies funded project, where they have different NGOs funds. They have several sessions, for example, annually or 6 months, every 6 months, to bring together their NGOs who are funded by them, and to communicate and to share the information in order to have the understanding what is going on by that specific donor. And I think ADBs also knows this experience, just for share, and it's supporting us also to understand and to have new partners, to have a new network, but also under the same funding opportunity. But still, I would like that also NGOs and also government to have the strategy of consolidated and more coordinated approaches during the crisis in order not to have duplications and effective resource mobilization and cost-effective approaches.
Thank you, Lucine and Georgie. Lucine talked about supporting coordination work also of civil society, and cited about helpful donor practices like convening their partners, CSO partners, in a learning exchange and networking opportunity as well. So that has been very helpful. I think ADB can do that in our civil society programs, and that's one way of reaching out to civil society as well. Actually, we're supposed to close, but I know that we started late, so that's why we're trying to provide more time for discussion and questions. Unless we don't have further questions from our colleagues, do we have further comments from our colleagues? Otherwise, may I ask, sorry, our documenter Jen, sorry for putting you on the spot, but you may have, can you perhaps give a quick summary of our discussions today? I'd like to personally pick out the recommendations from Georgie about really engaging the open government partnership. That's an avenue for government to at least to open the dialogues between government and CSOs. And Jen here, who is our consultant and trying to document our discussion, is actually a project manager of Philippine Open Government NGO. How do you call yourself? NGO
Secretariat.
secretariat. Secretariat. So I'm not sure if you met Georgie in the Open Government Summit in Georgia, right? So anyway, those are important avenues that I think ADB should also support, because ADB supports Open Government Partnership. Our governance team supports that kind of activities, and in fact has an ongoing call for, how do you call it, hackathon for ideas for monitoring, particularly monitoring COVID-19 responses of governments. Jen, a quick
Yes.
summary, please. Thank you.
Yes, I took note of highlights from the presentations of Georgie and Lucine, and it shows that the pandemic has exacerbated problems not only for the health sector, but even the social and economic sectors, and CSOs, and how we do our work. We were not spared by the pandemic. It is also shown from Georgie's presentation, as well as from the sharing of Lucine, that CSOs can contribute greatly in supporting government for pandemic recovery, given that the CSOs have wide range of expertise. So, for instance, Georgia has identified public procurement as one area where CSOs can do a lot, and specifically calling for openness and transparency in public procurement. And I note from George's presentation that openness and transparency should not be compromised even during the pandemic, and it should even be a priority, since people and public funds are used or utilized for the pandemic response. I also note that from the presentations of both our resource persons, they highlighted cooperation and the value of CSO networks coming together to complement what government is doing, as well as what other development partners are doing, because we know that CSOs have, and when there are networks, there are people working on the ground. So Lucine has been explaining this, the expertise of the grassroots level. The government can benefit from that because they know the realities on the ground, and the realities on the ground should be included in the strategies of government, so that the strategy of government will be more responsive to the needs of the communities. And I note also that despite the bleak environment that COVID has created, there are spaces or opportunities. We can look at it as a glass half full and not half empty. So there are openings for us. Like for example, um, our skills in terms of technology, we have learned how to adopt. And Georgie and Lucine has highlighted this. They have CSOs were able to adopt quickly, so that they will be able to provide the services they give to the community. So transition from in person to online has been adopted well by civil society. And also networking opportunities has been easier now because of the advent of technology. But also you should take note that transition from from offline to online has also accompanying challenges. So connectivity and other areas, marginalized sectors and marginalized areas should be part of that transition, and government should provide that support. So far, that's what I have documented. Thank you, Roselle.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you. I think that's a good summary of our discussion today. And thank you very much, Ida. Ida has been part of the design of this training, and she assumed the role of DG Werner, no, because DG could not join as he is in currently is in a board meeting. But Ida, thank you very much for uh, your able moderation of today's session. And definitely, Lucine, thank you very much for even at the last minute, you also took the place of your partner from the Ministry of Education, and you did very well in the discussion. And of course, Georgie has been always a partner of ADB, has consulted ADB has consulted Georgia on many things, even in the civil society brief for Georgia, right? Thank you for your views on your experience in Georgia, but because it definitely also speaks for the rest of the countries in Central and West Asia. Okay, so I think we can call this a day. Thank you very much for joining us. But remember that we have this is just the first day of our 3-day training program. We will be back again tomorrow at the same time for another session. This time we will listen to your stories. Our participants, our regional, our RM anchors from our resident missions will share about their civil society experiences. And as Ida mentioned, we will feature for tomorrow Armenia, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Afghanistan. But definitely, we'd like you to take advantage of those breakout groups tomorrow to talk also of your stories from wherever you are coming from. And just a note that our session tomorrow will be a bit longer. We will start at 3 o'clock, but we will end a bit later at 5 p.m. So that's a good 2 hours to share our stories, and we will use that time for learning exchange. So I would like you to be candid about concerns and also finding opportunities, no, uh, finding opportunities given our context to find ways to improve civil society engagement within ADB. All right. Ida, you'd like to give a closing message?
Yeah, thank you so much for participation, and thank you so much for great presentations and very open and transparent notes and comments to the government's activities. I come from Kyrgyz Republic, and as you know, we are, I think, in the similar pool. And I look forward to our presentations from our resident mission colleagues on what inputs has been made together with CSOs. And I'd like just to highlight, I think, from my point of view, the most important session is on the third day of the training, where I think we are introducing new ways how we will be partnering with CSOs. And I really look forward to active participations and asking questions from our presenters on that day, because as soon as this will be on and kind of approved, we'll need to implement basically this new ways of working with and partnering with CSOs.
Yes, thank you,
Thank you so
Ira.
much to everyone.
Thank you for highlighting that. Okay, before we leave, can I ask you to turn on your videos and we will take a photo? So just at least, even though we're not seeing each other face to face, we get to see each other virtually. Okay. Please, everyone, turn on your
standard
videos.
workshop photo.
Correct. Okay, smile because Sam is taking our photo right now. Can you turn on your...
All right, please smile.
Okay. I think half are not yet turning on their videos. So please turn on your videos, so we can see where you're coming from, where you're logging in. Okay. Hello, everyone. Okay. Great. Thank you very much. Sam, are we good? Okay. Thank you, everyone. See you tomorrow, same time, 3 o'clock.
Thank you. See you.
Thank you, and stay healthy.
Stay
Thank
healthy.
you.
Stay healthy.
Yeah, thank you.